All right, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As I'm sure most of you know, this evening we will hear from three Democratic candidates who hope to represent District 3 in the U.S. House of Representatives. Those three gentlemen are in alphabetical order: Adam Christensen, Phil Dodds, and Tom Wells. Gentlemen, we're going to begin by giving you 3 minutes each to introduce yourselves and tell us how you would define your role as congressman and what would be the first steps that you would take to serve your district. And we'll begin with Mr. Wells.
To give up their evil ways. March, April of Wall Street, the paper economy, and we left floundering the working economy. People are facing eviction. The best the Congress can come up with is reducing the $600 welfare unemployment supplement that has existed heretofore to $200. They are trying to bankrupt the states. If the states go bankrupt, they will be exactly like Puerto Rico. They will be facing austerity. They will be forced to cut pensions to retired state employees. They will have a number of abominations visited upon us by the will of Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. But now it's not just them, because the whole Republican caucus, House and Senate, lives off of Donald Trump's tweets. They turn on a tweet, and the principal conservatives mean the only principle you follow is the direction given to you by your dictator in chief. What can we do about that? We have a morass to get out of January. Lordy, I wish there were a way to do that earlier, because the deaths that shall transpire and the evictions and poverty that shall transpire in the interval are unimaginable and never before seen in America.
30 seconds, Mr. Wells.
Thank you. What I will be doing will be trying to convince my colleagues that we have a soft revolution by giving them the option of public funds, which, if they pass at the same time Medicare for All done in 1 year, will allow them to make their constituents healthier and happier and wealthier, and then to reelect the people who gave them that. The object is not to win a victory. The object is to redeem the people who are there, because that's the only choice we have.
Thank you. Mr. Dodds.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to meet you. Thank you for holding the forum, and thank you for everyone online for taking the time to listen and to learn. By the end of this forum, I hope that you gain new confidence that we're on the right side of history and that we have a unique opportunity to flip this red district blue this year. I hope to show you that we have the right values, the right priorities, right, and the right focus And if we can bring the right energy in 2020, we can bring the blue wave. My name is Phil Dodds. I'm a 25-year resident of Alachua County. I went to the University of Florida. I received my Bachelor's of Science in Mathematics and Physics. And I've spent my professional career working on healthcare software for doctors. What I hope to do is run for a representative government that works for everyone, not just the super wealthy. We need a government that helps build and guide an economy that works for everyone. I want to work to reduce healthcare costs. I want to protect the environment. I want to seek social justice so that our government truly represents everyone. And I want to root out corruption as we transition this current presidential administration to the next. We need to steward him out, and we need to make sure that the norms of the presidency that he has broken are written into law and statute for the future so that this never happens again. Serving as a representative in the U.S. Congress is a sacred duty. It's a mission of service. It's at the heart of our American experiment in our democracy. It's the most important thing I think we could be doing right now is making sure we get a representative that represents us and understands democracy and understands what it means to listen to our district, to stay connected to the district, and to take the values and needs of the district to Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
We'll have a lot more. Thank you very much.
Mr. Christensen.
Before I start, can we have the host mute everyone who is not a speaker?
Yes, I was also asked to ask the audience to mute your microphones, please.
The host should be able to override anyone and turn off all of their microphones.
Go ahead, Mr. Christensen.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for having me. My name is Adam. I am running for Congress here as well as Phil and Tom. I grew up in a extremely conservative household. I grew up in Indiana, in one of the reddest counties in the country. And the one thing that I know and that I grew up learning was that personal responsibility is paramount. And that on top of that, we need to make sure that we understand that most independents and Republicans who live around us, they don't actually think that the Republican Party or the Democratic Party care whether or not they live or die. At the end of the day, the question is for us, which party is going to make sure that people are able to afford a home, be able to start a family, and be able to have some money left over at the end of the week? Right now, what we are facing is a housing crisis. We are facing an eviction crisis. We are facing a global pandemic. And we can talk about flipping the district all that we want. But if once we're in power and we actually do flip the district, we're not willing to fight for the things that will actually change people's lives, then it's for nothing. And so for me, the biggest thing that we can do and make sure that we do is to fight whether or not we are in power for every single inch of land that we can here in Florida. Because the better that our House districts do, the better our congressional district does. The better our congressional district does, the better the state of Florida does. And if we can flip Florida this year, we are going to be able to solve a lot of issues, but just flipping it is not enough. Actually having the political courage and the will to change people's lives and make people's lives better, that is what matters more than anything. I run a company, my first company I ever built. It was focused on catching fraud. There are companies all across the country who sell the most products. They have the prettiest wrapping, the best marketing, but their products are fake. And yet they tell us that they are real. And most of the things in our society are just like that. Right now, we have people who have predatory debt that they got at the age of 17 because somebody convinced them that the only way to get ahead in life is to take on $200,000 of debt to go to college. We have people right now that will never be able to afford a home. We have people right now that are on their last paycheck and they don't know whether or not they're going to be able to keep their home. And so right now, the focus needs to be on people, not corporations, not hedge funds, not bailouts, people. And unless you can convince Republicans and independents of that, then we haven't done a whole lot. And so that has been our goal. That is why our campaign is staffed by 50 young people who believe the world can be better. It is the reason that we have been out there phone banking, making sure that we do everything we can during this pandemic, not only to reach people, but to convince them that the world can change and that we can be the start of that. And so our campaign is exciting, but at the same time, it's pragmatic. It makes sure that we understand how we're going to get these things done.
30 seconds.
And so I want to thank my entire team for all the work that they've been putting in since January to get us to this point. And I want to thank all the people who have supported us and are voting for us, who believe that we can actually do this. The slogan, the thing that we always come back to is everything we are promoting is for the many, not just me. So thank you for having me tonight. And I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you very much. The next question is as follows. How would you represent a district with financially sound but ever-growing cities alongside economically stagnant rural areas with significant inequality in both urban and rural areas? Mr. Dodds, we'll begin with you on this question.
Thank you. So it's very important to be able to talk to the whole entire district and to represent them all. The starting point is to make sure we meet the basics for everyone and remove their economic and health insecurities. So we're going to reform healthcare. We're going to protect Social Security and Medicare. We're going to protect the environment. In the scope of the big picture, we need to improve our ability to compete. Today, due to our international economic relationships and free trade, and the way Republicans try and manage our economy, we're in a race to the bottom, where everyone who gets an education, gets a job, and then tries to do the right thing has to compete with every country around the world without the same aspirations for a good environment, for a living wage, etc. And that's unfair competition, and we suffer. So I would propose that we take a second look at our international trade and make sure that we're trading more with countries that are headed in the right direction and not giving away our economic viability to countries who are bringing us to what's called a race to the bottom. It's not a vision for America where we're all being paid as little as possible with the least economic environmental protections and no education. We need to make sure we're lifting everybody up. Likewise, we have a very agricultural and rural district, and we need to make sure that we're ending monopolies so that small and mid-sized farms and small and mid-sized businesses can compete against the larger companies. So let's make sure that we're supporting small and mid-sized companies and removing monopolies. I think my time is up, so I'll...
Yes, your time is up. Sorry, we're still having issues, backroom issues here. Mr. Christensen, you're next. Would you like to have the question read again?
That would be great.
Okay. How would you represent a district with financially sound but growing cities alongside large, economically stagnant rural areas with significant inequality in both?
I think the first thing that we need to remember is that politics is personal. It is emotional. And the only way to be able to solve the problems that we have is to be able to connect with people and show them not only that you have the best policy, but that you actually care about them. And so let's talk about a couple things. Right now, we have huge income inequality. I don't think anybody's going to debate that. The question is, what do we propose to actually fix that? Because right now you've got Republicans who propose all of these tax cuts, and at the end of the day, they might save you $300 a year. But if you were to propose something like, I don't know, universal child care, you would save everyone about $8,000 a year. That right there, whether or not you are in a rural area, whether or not you are in a suburban area, or if you are in a heavily populated area, that is going to put a ton of money back in your pocket. And the way that you should frame that is as a middle-class tax cut. On top of that, right now you have your small businesses that are paying $8,000 to $10,000 per employee for health insurance. The ones that can compete and actually do that, and the ones that are able to hire the best people, are going to be the largest companies with the biggest profit margins, and that kills small businesses and it kills startups. You remove that burden, you remove the middlemen from that industry, everything is 30% cheaper. And on top of that, now your small businesses can compete.
30 seconds, Mr. Christensen.
And let's go to the last and final thing. We have the biggest companies in the world that are coming in to destroy our small towns and our rural areas and consolidate them. We have people like Nestle that are coming to bottle unlimited amounts of water from the Santa Fe River and destroy the town of High Springs. And it doesn't matter who you are, Republican, Independent, Democrat, environmentalist, that is the enemy. You go after them, you protect your people and your community, that's how you win.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
Unmuted, and off we go. So in normal times, you have a plan, and then the plan changes because of the catastrophes that Donald Trump has brought upon the country. It is imperative that we do Medicare for all. That will relieve a great deal of burdens. It is imperative that we raise the minimum wage. And let us do that in the same way that tax cuts have been implemented. For 40 years, people have been saying trickle-down tax cuts, and they put them into effect instantly, and the effect is exactly the opposite of what they state the intended effect to be. But when that is repeated, it's not insanity. It is a plan that is being misrepresented. Let us instead put money in at the bottom of the economy by raising the minimum wage, and let's do it just as fast as the tax cuts. We will give people 3 months to adjust their pricing to reflect the labor fraction of their cost, and we will raise the minimum wage from what it is now to $18. Why 18? Well, the fight for 15 was very much a 2012 thing, and by inflation, that is now $18. Let us tie the minimum wage to productivity, the national productivity of the workforce, so that when automation is introduced and productivity increases, that the workforce has the ability to buy the same proportion of their product. Let us then look at the displacements that rapid adjustment creates. There are two kinds. In Social Security, we need to raise the benefits. We need to do that by eliminating the cap on Social Security contributions and recognizing capital gains as taxable income. We need further to adjust union rights, but I have exhausted my time. To do this properly, it takes 9 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wells. Our next question is that it seems clear that Social Security and Medicare are insufficient to sustain themselves in the long term. If you were elected, how much priority would you give to sustaining these two programs, and what would you advocate to extend their lives? And in this case, we'll begin with Mr. Christensen. Sorry.
That's all good. Most people don't even spell it right anyway.
Yeah, sorry.
I think that if we're just talking about sustaining something, we've already lost. let's be honest here. We have a $60 to $80 billion surplus when it comes to Social Security right now. And the only reason that they say that we are not able to afford it in the long run is because they are not willing to actually make the people who have the most wealth in our country pay their fair share. They have put a cap on the amount of money that they actually pay in. So right now they pay less by percentage than you and I do. And they have the most money in the world. And so if we're just going to talk about sustaining it, I think we've already lost. The question is, how do we increase it? How do we make sure Social Security benefits actually get increased and actually allow for cost of living expenses, actually make it so that our senior citizens are able to not just survive, but actually have a decent living? The question should not be, do we sustain something? The question is, how do we not only build it, how do we move it forward? And how do we create other programs that are going to help the communities that already benefit from Social Security? Because right now, what we have seen in the middle of a pandemic is that if you have a government that is so small, you can take it to the bathtub and you can drown it, you've already lost and you are in a bad position. The question is not whether or not we have bigger government. The question is whether or not we have services that actually work and we're willing to make them work.
Thank you. Let me see. Hold on just a second, please. Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells, would you like to have the question repeated?
Oh, I'm good. It really
Okay.
feeds off of the answer I gave previously. Adam covered a lot of that you do want to remove the cap on Social Security. You also want to count capital gains. And one of the arguments for not counting capital gains as taxable income is the poor billionaires say, well, gosh, my stock went up, I would have to sell some of it in order to pay that tax. Well, you know, ordinary people make a certain amount of money and they have to give some of it to the government. It's an abomination that our Congress has listened to such specious arguments for 40 years. And that abomination derives from corporate funding of elections. It is why we have no representation in Congress. Now, for 40 years, this minimum wage has fallen relative to cost of living, to productivity, all these things. And we are raising the minimum wage. That means that, in effect, we are raising to a just wage. In effect, retired people are living on benefits calculated from unjust wages that they earned in their working life. So we will double their wages as we double the minimum wage. And there is plenty of money to do that. Social Security benefits the rich because they never get to the point which they are approaching rapidly now that France approached in 1789. And the consequences there were rather deleterious to those who were benefiting off the labor of peons. I think also union rights tie into this because union contracts, when you do this, as you should, justly and quickly, you would see a necessity of renegotiating all union contracts, and they will no longer have to pay for health insurance. That will not be a consideration. And we will tie union contract labor rates to the minimum wage as a multiple of the minimum wage, so that when the minimum wage increases as is pegged at productivity, union wages will automatically increase as well. How do you get people to join unions? So the right to laws vitiate the rights of unions. We will obviate them at the federal level by saying, since the unions provide a great benefit to the country, higher wages, more tax money, etc., we will negotiate payment of union dues by the federal government.
Thank you. Mr. Dodds, would you like to have the question repeated?
No, thank you. So protecting Social Security and Medicare is this question is a strategic weakness of the Republicans. Come election time, they all talk about protecting Social Security and Medicare because they know that voters depend on those programs. But then during the rest of their governing, they constantly work and hint to their donors that they are going to cut Social Security and Medicare. President Trump at least twice has proposed budgets for the federal government that have included cuts to those programs. So Republican voters don't realize that their elected officials are working against them. And it comes down to a matter of trust. This question is a real question that gets posed in our media all the time. How are we going to support Social Security and Medicare? But it's really ultimately a false question. It's really easy, right? Raise the cap on income. That will protect it. Then let's go forward. Let's make sure we have a Medicare public option. Let's make sure Medicare and health insurance is available whether you're employed or not. If you lose your job in a pandemic, you shouldn't lose your insurance. If you try to become an entrepreneur, as all Republicans support, start your small business, you should not feel like you're tied to your job because of your health insurance. So let's bolster both, reduce health and financial insecurity of our people, and then see the economy really thrive. The reason why Republicans, and especially Trump Republicans, are against Social Security and Medicare is because their donors want to cut. But when you really represent your district and you tell them the truth, right, it's not hard to come up with a myriad of plans and ideas to solve the real problems and support them, right? They have given, right, older people have given to the Social Security program and paid into all of these benefits, right? And the only fair thing to do is to support them and maintain and grow both these programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, I think we got everyone. A recent Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, University of Wisconsin report on the health of citizens in America's counties ranked District 3 counties near the bottom of the state. The report also showed disparity between the health of populations based on racial identity. What would you do as congressman to improve health conditions for all? Mr. Wells.
Well, the educational opportunities and the health opportunities are disproportionately the advantage of the wealthy. So both of these needs the same federal treatment, which is for schools, we will fund them federally. That eliminates the regressive property taxes, which we have now. For medical health care, we will fund them equally by Medicare for all. The payment rates for Medicare will be the same across the country. There will be incentives to add medical facilities in poor areas. We will save $1.6 trillion every year by doing Medicare for all. We have a tremendous corporate welfare system I introduced in my introduction, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. We have plenty of money to provide everybody with medical care. The problem in transitioning quickly to the system that is just, that recognizes healthcare as a human right, the problem is that we need about 200 to 300,000 more doctors to cover the 25 to 80 million people, depending on your calculation, who have inadequate access to healthcare. We can use the same mechanism that Richard Nixon used back in the 60s. We can allow visa entry to train doctors from other countries, and we can staff up quickly. This can be done in 1 year, and it is unjust to delay it because a 4-year transition means that 48,000 excess deaths the first year is only reduced to 32,000 the second year, 16,000 next year. No, it is only just to do this as quickly as it can be. I have worked with Dr. Joe Friedman. It can be done in 1 year. He has a specific paper describing the mechanism with detailed calculations. We will take care of the code matchers. We will retrain them at full salary for 3 years, and we still save well a lot of money overall.
Thank you. Mr. Dodds.
So here again is a strategic weakness of Republicans and Republican candidates. They harp on our cultural biases and they focus on creating division, right? When really the answers to the racial disparities are very often the answers for everyone. We just have to care. We don't care in our government, in our politicians about rural areas. We don't care about the disparities. Systematically, we have students growing up in schools that are not well funded because of property tax funding. Let's fund schools everywhere equally. We have areas of our counties, like at my home here sometimes, where there is no good internet access. Everyone needs internet access to live and compete in the modern economy and to, in this case, get an education in a pandemic. So let's just build that and provide access. We need to increase access to housing. So let's double the low-income housing vouchers. These things aren't hard. You just have to care. Republicans don't have solutions. They just play on our divisive issues and then walk away. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Christensen.
Would you be able to repeat it?
Yes. A recent Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, University of Wisconsin report on health of citizens in America's counties ranked 3 District 3 counties near the bottom of the state. The report also showed disparity between the health of populations based on racial identity. What would you do as congressman to improve health conditions for everyone in your district?
That's what I thought the question was. The very first thing that you have to understand is that healthcare is a human right. In the middle of a pandemic, if one person doesn't have healthcare, then everyone else who does is at risk. So right there, we have a fundamental issue. The question is, do we allow employer-based insurance to continue? Where if you lose your jobs, you lose your insurance. You lose your ability to make sure that you don't get sick. And right there is the fundamental flaw that we have in our healthcare system. The fact that we have tied health insurance to whether or not you get care. What we have seen is that, number one, insurance companies are predatory. They are middlemen. They do not have a free market. They essentially have corporate welfare and corporate socialism. Our pharmaceutical companies, they don't have a free market because they get to determine whatever prices they sell to the United States government and to people. Right now, they have no caps. They have no cost negotiation. They basically say whatever we want to charge, that's what we're going to charge, and you don't get a say because you've written a law that says you don't get to negotiate prices. There's 2 things right there. The next thing is, what you just said is essentially that, especially in our area, we have an equity problem, not an equality problem, an equity problem. Equality is great, but if you don't have equity to make sure that people who have it worse, who have been downtrodden for their entire lives, are able to get the same kind of care, not just same kind of care, but quality of care and affordability and availability, then you failed. And so right there, we have to make sure that not only in our rural areas, but especially our rural areas, but especially in our communities that historically have been hit the hardest, we are able to provide not just decent healthcare, but good quality healthcare at a lower cost than what we already do. And the only way to do that is to kick out the insurance companies. And so right there, it's called Medicare for all. That's it. That is the question of how you actually are able to fix some of these disparities, how you're able to actually cut down on the Black mortality rate for new mothers, how you actually are able to make sure that people have health care, whether or not they have a job, whether or not they have insurance. Because in a pandemic, if we make it so that that's not the case, like we've seen, it's more expensive for everyone. Because if we don't take care of our problems before they start, then we're just cleaning up messes. And we're just trying to stitch together wounds that have been sitting and festering for a very long time.
30 seconds, Mr. But there you have it. We have one more question, and then we'll take a very short break. In District 3, access to hospital care has diminished in recent years, as it has in many rural areas across the country. What do you believe Congress can or should do in the near term and over the long haul? And we'll begin with Mr. Dodds.
Thank you. So everyone watching, you get how we're going to flip this district and take it to the Republicans, right? You can see we have plans, we care, we're going to work together, and we're going to come out and vote. This question also is not really that hard. We just have to care. I work in healthcare IT. I'm very familiar with rural health clinics and the regulatory and reporting requirements that they're all subject to in order to receive grants from the federal government. I know that rural health clinics, those people are on a mission to serve those communities, but they can't stay in business because there's not the funds there. So first, we need to make sure everyone has health insurance, right? Once everyone has it, those clinics can thrive as a business and will be able to afford to provide those services. Second, in our rural communities, the health insurance is biased towards lower end payments, right? Medicaid doesn't pay as much as Medicare. Rural health insurance and grants don't pay as much as Medicare. So let's raise the payments we're willing to pay for the same services, whether they're done in a rural community or in a city. If we're willing to pay the same amount, we will be able to establish hospitals and clinics and so on that will be able to support those communities. So it's not really hard. We just have to care. And this is a place where I think Democrats can thrive and convince our district that we can solve their problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Christensen.
The reason that we don't have healthcare in rural areas is because people choose to allow that to happen, and because it's more profitable not to. Right now, we treat healthcare and we treat hospitals and we treat making sure people are able to be healed from being sick. We treat that like we don't care. We treat that like we don't want to, number one, not just fund it, but actually make it a priority. I mean, right now, we make sure that people all over the country are able to get mail for a very small amount of cost because we actually built the infrastructure to do it. Why are we afraid to do that in the healthcare industry? Why are we afraid to actually take the steps that it would require, not only to create the jobs that it would, but also to cut the costs? Because we're not paying more. We're actually paying less in the long run. If you actually invest in things that matter and will make your costs less in the long run, you're doing better. That's what any smart business person does. That's what any smart person who's supposed to be in charge does, is you actually invest in things that at the end of the day are going to help you and going to cut your costs in the long run. And right now what we have is a bunch of people who are making a ton of money by not doing that. They are making more money because they refuse to actually invest in the future, because they're able to make money off of us now. They nickel and dime us for every single thing that they possibly can, and they expect us to just roll back and say, it's okay. But no, that's not what has to happen. It's just like broadband internet. The United States needs to actually create a system where we can build the infrastructure. We built the national highway system. We need to build a national broadband system. We need to make sure that we have a national healthcare system that actually is able to get to the rural areas. And that, at the end of the day, is going to be the biggest factor as to whether or not we are going to be able to provide health services to everyone. Whether or not we actually say healthcare should not be a for-profit institution, It should be a not-for-profit institution, and it should be about healing people and not just letting them stay sick so that we can make money off of them.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
Well, I'm on Medicare. I recall a couple of years ago in a debate, Ted Yoho was complaining that his doctor was thinking about not taking Medicare patients because indeed the repayment rate for doctors was less than what the insurance companies paid. Now, this is because it has been specifically sabotaged in Congress to make it appear less attractive so that people will not be inclined to go and approve of Medicare for all. The point that no one has made here before is that until 1973, HMO Act passed by Richard Nixon at the behest of a large insurance company, medical care was not for profit. There was no profit available to groups or hospitals or insurance companies. They operated as nonprofit co-ops. Other countries, no other OECD country has any aspect of their healthcare system for profit. So cost should not ever be a consideration, but it's not enough to just have nonprofit entities. It is required. If you're going to lose your job, you're not going to have any salary to pay even a fair insurance rate. When you have a job, you pay taxes. When you don't have a job, you have the right to health care. That is what Medicare for all means. There is not a cost factor in treating people out in Crescent City. There's not a cost factor in providing service up in Union County. Every part of the country will have the same payment scheme. Everybody, whether they're working or not working, or legal or illegal or a tourist, Medicare for all means all. And it will apply and it will save us money because the amount of corruption in this country is inestimable. Well, actually, it can be calculated. It's 1.6 trillion in the healthcare sector alone right now. And that's with 80 million people effectively not covered, including my son-in-law's father, who died for lack of access. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the candidates and your beleaguered moderator and our devoted technician are going to take a 5-minute break. And we suggest you do that as well. Get those all-important snacks out of the refrigerator and a little something to drink. But there will be some important messages during the meantime, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, James, and thank you, panelists. It has been a very interesting hour and quite enjoyable. I hope everyone is ready for a break and that the audience has had the opportunity to develop some questions. If you want to send questions through the chat, we have the opportunity to do that. And hopefully some people take advantage of it. We do have some questions that were submitted earlier when people were anticipating coming, and we've reformulated some of those to combine them, and James will be asking those a little bit later on. As we move into the election, one of the things that has been absolutely critical and repeated over and over again by the candidates is that we have to turn out to vote. We have to have the willpower to stand up and say, this is what we need, and this is how we're going to go about doing it. The first part is making sure we get as many people as possible absolutely registered to vote. Well, the good news in some respects is that right now there are 250,000 more Democrats registered in Florida than there are Republicans. The caveat on that is there are 3,600,000 people who have not identified either one of those as their party. So we need to make sure that we reach out to them. And the most effective way to do that is if every Democrat connects to 2, 3, or 4 of the NPAs and simply gets them to come out and vote for the right thing, because there's no question about what the right thing is in this election, and make sure that they do it and they do it in a timely manner. With that, we can carry Florida. The other piece of good news is that for vote by mail, which is probably going to be one of the most effective and critical parts of determining who wins Florida, the Democrats are very far ahead of the Republicans in registrations for vote by mail. Now, the flip side again on it is that the Republicans, about 80% of them will follow through, and if Democrats are typical, it's going to be about 50%. So we need to make sure that we're on top of getting those people to return their ballots in a timely manner. We have some dates that we need to keep in mind. The first is we have the primary election. We have to absolutely make sure that we have the best Democrat running in Congressional District 3. That is on the vote is August 18th, and the last day to register for that has already passed in terms of you have to be a registered voter at this point. You can still get a vote by mail ballot sent for that election, but in real terms, the deadline for that is about 2 weeks away. So that you've got to get them in time for, or actually, you're about 3 days away, because the post office has to handle it in two directions. The state of Florida actually did something good in response to what the supervisors of election requested, which was to find ways to get ballots turned in a timely manner so that they could be counted and not to have a major rush at the end. The supervisors are now allowed to put a drop box for ballots in all of the voting locations. So for early voting, you simply go into the early voting location, drop off your ballot. The same on election day, go into your precinct or any precinct and drop in your vote by mail ballot. They do not get counted until they go through the screening process at back of the supervisors of elections office. For that reason, we hope everyone turns the ballot in much beforehand so they can be approved. And if there's a problem of any kind, for example, you forgot to sign it or your signature was not the same, that they've got time to reach out to you, you can get it corrected and your vote will count. The important part, though, is getting to vote. And with the virus still increasing its impact, we strongly recommend that every voter get a vote by mail ballot so that you've got one more option so that you can make sure that you do have a say in this election. Other kinds of things that we need to worry about. We've got to contact something like statewide 7 million people to try to get them to vote. Some people are going to walk out and they'll wave at you, and absolutely, if you just smile in the direction, they'll go vote. But there are a tremendous number of Democrats and a tremendous number of NPAs who think that something is going to change between the time they make up their mind of who they're going to vote for and election day, and then screw it up and miss the deadline to vote. We've got to get them to the polls in plenty of time to make sure it counts. So we've got to get them the vote by mail ballot, and hopefully we can encourage them through phone calls to get them turned in. We then have to make sure that everybody who is not signed up for vote by mail or who hasn't done it yet gets down to early voting and get that done. And then if we're in desperation, if we've still got hundreds of thousands of people still left statewide and many thousand left in our small counties, we've got to be out on the phone reminding people to get voting early. And also, if you're going to vote late, that you stand in line so that you're there by 7 o'clock and you don't leave that line, and that under the law, you have the right to vote. But once you step out of line, even if it's to go to the bathroom, so you can be challenged, is not being there. So make sure that they get there early, have their ballot. If they've got their vote by mail ballot, you simply walk past the line, drop it in, and you can go home. And that's another reason to have that vote by mail ballot. So be a part of that. And then we need volunteers. We've got all those phone calls to make. We've got a lot of poll watching that needs to be done. This is going to be a contested election. We want to make sure that what happens at the polls is fair to everyone. We don't need people being intimidated going into the polls, which did happen in 2016. It did happen to a lesser degree in 2018, but it's going to be very significant statewide in 2020. And we also expect that the vote is going to be challenged. Trump is already laying the foundation for that. We need to make sure that we've got people in each county that are prepared to do the exciting job of watching the recount and then challenging the challenges. We have to have the people there. So we're going to need volunteers for that, and they have to be trained so that when the recount call comes, we get the people showing up the next morning ready to go. We would need poll watchers for every one of our precincts for the election in November. That means we will have people who will be coming in and out of the polling area, looking at the parking lot, looking at the instructions, making sure that everybody is following the rules, and the people who have a minor problem, the poll watcher can help them fix it, and we can make sure those people's votes count. So and just within Putnam County, we're going to need about 30 of those people just on election day. We need far fewer on early voting because it's easier just to go by the polls and to check them out on that. And that will work very well. I need to report to you also, the good part is that the Putnam County Supervisor election did the auditing of the equipment yesterday, and it passed. That is a laborious task. Witnessing it is about as boring as you can get to watch a machine count cards. But there's a strict procedure they went through, and in Putnam County, it's been done right, and we can have confidence that when the ballot is there, if it's marked in this sufficiently according to the instructions, it will get counted. And then what we need to do is be available to help people whose ballots didn't quite make it. Again, we need volunteers. And we're happy to announce that our office is open. In fact, we're broadcasting from our office right now. It's 320 St. John's Avenue, Suite 102 in Palatka. We invite you to come down between 11:30 and 5:30, check the place out. We get people dropping in. We even have Republicans coming over to talk to us. So it's a friendly place. We have Biden signs that are available, and we have candidate signs as they have them available so that you can pick them up and put them out on your lawn. Okay? James, how are we doing?
I think we're fine. I'm back. I'm raring to go.
Okay, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to mix it up a little bit, and I'm going to sort of jump out of the box here. Let's have each candidate take 1 minute to answer a question that was submitted by a viewer earlier. What should Congress do to get the ERA passed? And we'll give you, each of you, 1 minute to tell us what you think the Congress should do to get the ERA passed. Mr. Christensen.
I believe the answer is that I believe one more state has to pass it at its state level, and then it becomes overriding. I believe that is the case. At the same time, obviously, with this new Congress, you have an opportunity, especially with what it looks like with the fiasco that Ron DeSantis and at the end of the day, the current administration has under their hands, to be able to actually have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, and a Democratic president. And unless you actually take advantage of that and you actually push through and pass the things that have been sitting there for too long, then what are we doing? And so whoever is going to be the representative of this district, they have to make it a priority to not only push through an agenda, but to push through a progressive agenda that actually makes it so that people's lives are better.
Thank you. Mr. Dodds.
Hi, this is a really important question. It is pretty astounding to me that at this day and age, there is any ambiguity in our Constitution about a woman's status in society. So we should definitely ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. What needs to take place is that extra state needs to ratify it, but then it's the responsibility of Congress to approve that ratification, because the time limit has officially technically passed. So Congress would have to pass a law extending the window of time by which states would be allowed to ratify. So whoever goes to Congress representing our district would have to fight for and pass that extra law. I'm a strong proponent of Equal Rights Amendment, as I'm sure all of us are. Some young people in Orlando have been phone banking for me They're as a group for generation.
1 minute is up, Mr. Dodds.
So an equal rights amendment group is phone banking for me because they they see my support for the ERA. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Wells?
Well, Phil has covered the legal situation pretty accurately. It is probable that states will withdraw their support, and in that case, I will suggest that we have an equal rights amendment which explicitly includes sex and sexual orientation in the same way that the Civil Rights Act did. It was designed to actually defeat the Civil Rights Act submitted by a Republican who absolutely opposed the Civil Rights Act, thinking that it would disqualify the passage, but it has been interpreted generously by the Supreme Court. We need to have rights for everyone. What the Congress can do in the meanwhile to assure some equality in the workplace is to ban contracts which deny people the right to exchange information about their work conditions and benefits. Those limit market information, and in a fair market capitalist system, which we are nowhere close to having, you should have market information both on the product market and the labor market. You should have competition, or you should socialize it, and you should have the obligation not to do damage to your neighbors, which the fossil fuel industry is doing in the hundreds of billions of dollars worth.
Okay, thank you very
social
much.
cost and health detriments.
All right, we'll go back to 3-minute questions now. And the next question is that agriculture is one of your district's primary employers. It is also a known driver of environmental degradation. It is a factor in global warming, and it is an occupation with risks, high risks to worker health. How would you help sustain agriculture in your district as a viable career while reducing its damage to the environment and to the health of the agricultural workers? And we'll begin with Mr. Christensen.
Thanks. My grandfather has been a farmer for 60 years. My entire side of that family is still farming as well. For me, this one is extremely personal. We have to, number one, protect small and family farms from consolidation and from down years. If we are not able to protect small and family farms from being consolidated and really going out and just being destroyed, then we're not doing our job. So at this moment, number one, we have to protect small and family farms. We have to actually enable them to not only survive, but to thrive. And so right now, a lot of them are worried about if they have a bad year, that they're going to lose everything. And a lot of times that does happen. And then somebody buys them for pennies on the dollar because they were waiting for that opportunity. On top of that, what we also understand is that if we are not able to solve global warming, if we're not able to solve climate change as quickly as possible, then most of our coastline is going to be gone. And so, especially for farms, we have to make sure that we can cut down on the amount of carbon that is being emitted into the atmosphere to begin with. We have to actually implement sustainable agricultural practices. We need to be able to fund our small family farms using federal money to make sure that, number one, they can stay in business, but they can also survive and thrive. And then we have to make sure that we focus on the fact that at this moment in time, if we don't actually get this right, it's going to hurt us for generations. And so that is the biggest things that we have to do immediately. It's also has to do a huge amount with the Green New Deal and making sure that we actually have a federal jobs guarantee to be able to cut the amount of issues that we're going to have with climate change as quickly as possible before it's too late.
Thank you. Mr. Dodds.
So some extra thoughts on that. Small and mid-sized farmers have a terrible time competing with the larger ag companies. And one of the disadvantages of several that they have is that they don't have as ready access to the tools and information they need in order to be as smart and as capable as they could be. Which are the right seeds this season? What's the right weather conditions? What do I need to know if I go to transition my crops from one type of harvest to another? For example, from growing citrus to growing hemp, right? The big industries have access to the scientists and the data, but small and mid-sized farmers need those same tools. So the federal government, in support of local and state agencies, can work really hard to providing the information and the training they need. In addition, small and mid-sized farmers are competing, like I said earlier, before the break, against an international trade, right? And they want to be good stewards of the land and the air and the water, but they have to be able to stay in business. So let's not have a race to the bottom. Let's make sure that we do more trade with countries that are also doing the right things, so that our farmers aren't at a disadvantage when they try and do the right things. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Wells.
Yes, thank you. The problems of agriculture are deep, but they all derive from the control of the Congress by the big ag companies. The control of the Congress extends to laws which regulate patents and how patents are enforced. Having a patent on seeds means that Monsanto and the ilk can raise the price of seeds, which are hybrid seeds that can't be used from year to year, and calculate how much farmers are likely to make and raise the price of the seed, which is unique to their company, such that small farmers are always at the borderline. They also have patent protection through the courts, where if their seeds get in your land, quote, accidentally, then you pay for the damages. You are liable, you are a victim, even though you were fighting as hard as you could to keep your farm organic and not to use their products. The other problem with GMO seeds is that they're specifically designed to tolerate high levels of poisons. We are not specifically designed to that purpose, and we suffer from this. The changes in the APA rules as to overcoverage of plots of land by pesticides, the use of pesticides which are inimical to bees, for example. We have a system of laws which is designed to kill us, not in the long term, but soon. We have to revise those laws. I do not know them all. I will employ good people. It's easy to find people who know more than I do. And we will solve these problems. It can be solved, but only after you reconnect Congress to the people, to the farmers, and you get rid of things like an agriculture department, which let food in Florida, $500 million of it, go rot in the fields during March and April because the agriculture department did not use funds that were available to it to take that food, pay them for it, and deliver it to food banks for the hungry. We may be starving in the fall.
Thank you. The next question is also a 3-minute question. Income and wealth inequality has become a focus of the progressive agenda, and it will appear in the Democratic Party platform. If elected, how will you attempt to address this broad issue of income and wealth inequality? Mr. Dodds.
Okay, so are we all paying attention and we see how Democrats can win this year and make sure we flip Florida for Vice President Biden? So the Democratic platform is really a platform of values, and it's a platform of ethics, right? We currently have an economy where the super wealthy take advantage, right? They reap all the benefits, all the increases in productivity. You know, the harder we work, the more they get. So one, the super wealthy must pay their fair share. We need to add tax brackets to the upper end, right? So those that make $500,000 a year, $10 million a year, and so on, pay higher taxes. Next, most people don't realize that capital gains, right? The money that wealthy people make merely by investing and not having to lift a finger of actual work is taxed at a lower rate than work and income. So let's level that to where capital gains is taxed at the same level as income tax. That's only fair, and it would help everything, right? Small business and family farms need to compete, so let's break up monopolies and restricted industries that push out competition. Let's make sure the largest corporations pay their fair share. Let's increase the minimum wage. Let's make sure, like we spoke about before, we provide health insurance, right? And let's boost education, better internet access, cheap higher education and technical education, and pre-K education as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wells. And Mr. Wells, would you like to have the question repeated?
Yes, thank you.
Income and wealth inequality has become a focus of the progressive agenda, and it will appear in the Democratic Party platform. If elected, how would you attempt to address this broad issue of income and wealth inequality?
Well, the fundamental problem is the ability of people to create monopolies and to create unearned wealth through owning Congress. The number of laws, there are just about every law since 1980. We need to unwind every one of those laws. Many of them in the last 20 years have been written by corporate lawyers. They are the transfer of wealth. The class war is real, and we are losing. We are close to it. We're at the survival bottom under Donald Trump, but we got there through a 40-year process. That 40-year process of taking from the poor and giving to the rich left the ground fertile in 2016 for anyone offering any kind of change. That is the womb that bore Donald Trump, the monster that presides over this government now. It is not difficult to reverse these laws if we have people who wish to represent us. It's very easy work. When they wish to represent us, we will eliminate monopolies by breaking them up. If they can't be broken up, we will treat them as public utilities. Internet is at the point where it should be a public utility, as has been alluded by one of my colleagues earlier in the discussion. The pandemic makes it clear that you need to have it, like the post office, as being universally available in the United States, just like the post office is required to deliver mail to any point in the United States. You should have access to internet at any point in the United States at the same cost as any other, because you want people to be in reality equal. Those are only first steps. We will reverse every tax cut going back to 1980. We deserve to have what we had when I was a child, which was tax rates in the 80 or 90% range, because it's at least 10 times as easy to make $1 million if you have 100 million than if you have $100. Making $1 million should be, you shouldn't get to keep it all when you're just investing in paper, like Phil said.
30 seconds.
No, capital gains has to be taxed. Wealth has to be taxed. We get rid of the tax on property because it is a regressive tax. We get rid of regressive taxes generally.
Thank you. I'm going to throw something in here. Let's have a 10-second time limit on this question. How long have each of you been
No, I don't believe
part
I was asked that
of
one.
this community? Oh, sorry, Mr. Christians, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Do you want the question again?
No, I think I got it.
Okay.
We've been here before. I don't know. I mean, nobody was alive for it, but there is, as the quote goes, nothing new underneath the sun. In the 1890s, the progressive movement that's when it started. It was the original progressives were Republicans. It was Teddy Roosevelt who basically said that monopolies and trusts and oligarchs, they were killing capitalism, that they were coming in and destroying the free market everywhere. And he made it his life goal to go after JP Morgan. He made it his life goal to go after Rockefeller. He said that if these people control our society, we don't have a free society. We don't have a free market. We don't have a United States that works. And so he spent his entire time, not only as president, but prior to that, pointing out who the real enemy was, pointing out who we actually have to show people who is the problem that we have in society. And at this moment, we had a wealth gap at that time, and they did a couple things. Number one, they broke up the monopolies. They went after the trusts. They actually did things that made people's lives better. And on top of that, you had people that came after that created Social Security. You had people that actually made it so that companies were held accountable when they screwed up, that CEOs were held accountable when they screwed up, that politicians were held accountable when they screwed up. But for some reason, in the 90s, we decided that the first thing we were going to do is get rid of something called Glass-Steagall, which basically allowed investment banks and community banks to become one, which means now people get to gamble with your savings account. And what did that do? Well, in 2008, we had a housing bubble because of it. All of the problems that we have right now, they can be stemmed back to a couple big issues of where you had people that realized they could make a lot of money by passing a couple laws that only benefited themselves. And so the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to stop that. You actually have to go after those people that worked behind the scenes for years to gain an advantage so that everybody else can now survive. You have to go after, just like Tom said, in broadband internet, you have monopolies. You have corporate cartels that own everything. In most industries at the moment, you have the same thing. And so the question is, are we actually going to stand up, Republican, Independent, Democrat, it doesn't matter. Are we actually going to stand up and say that the people that are our class or poorer than us are not the reason we can't get a good paying job? They are not the reason that right now our family-owned businesses are going under. People our class and people poorer than us are not the reason that we cannot get ahead. It's because somebody has come in, destroyed those family-owned businesses and replaced them with jobs that pay a third. And then they tell us that survival is the only thing that we can ever achieve. And so for me, that's the switch that has to happen. We have to take the exact same path that has been laid out before, and the United States has gone through this before, and do it again. And this time make it stick. And so for me, that's what I'm going to focus on.
Mr. Christensen. Thank you. And my apologies again. Here's a 10-second question. One of the viewers wanted to know how long each of you has, the question was, have you been part of this community? But let's make that, how long have you lived in this district? Mr. Christensen.
Since I graduated college.
Which was?
16. And started my first company here in Gainesville, Florida.
Okay. All right. Mr. Wells?
I moved here from Boston in '98 in Ocala. I lived at, was not present at that point, District 3. I moved to Gainesville in the year 2000.
And Mr. Dodds?
In late 1991, I attended the University of Florida, and I've been here ever since, married with my extended family.
Okay. Thank you very much. This question is a 3-minute question, and the opposition party will attempt to paint you as a socialist. a hater of capitalism, a threat to Second Amendment rights, a protector of criminals, and even a baby killer. What will be your campaign strategy to get elected, given all of these assaults on your character over the next 2 months? Mr. Wells.
Well, I have been campaigning in this district for 49 months, pretty much straight. I did visit my family a few weeks. 7 days a week, pretty much 12 hours a day. I have talked to over 45,000 people, and I don't discriminate. And by that, I mean I talked even to the other side. I have visited them and talked with them in groups, with Ted Yoho's groups, because I do wish to represent everybody. But more than that, I want to understand what their messaging is so I can counter their messaging. I have convinced people who are strong Second Amendment proponents that what I'm saying is Second Amendment. The Supreme Court agrees, has defined it, and it includes banning assault weapons. It includes requiring training, isolation of your gun in your house, inability to carry it outside the house without specific approval. That's the law in Maryland, and it has been accepted by the Supreme Court. As to the baby killing, that is more difficult, but I address it the same way that my father did. He died back in '66, and he had taught me even at age 15 that abortion should be rare, safe, and legal. Because when it's illegal, it means poor people die when they discover that they have to have an abortion, and rich people go and get an abortion somewhere else. It's not even an inconvenience, really. The other arguments, well, they have no other arguments now because their party is taking us over a cliff and then throwing rocks down upon us. So these questions are coming up less and less frequently. Communist? Yeah, I get that word. I was talking to somebody today who called me and said, "Are you a communist?" And I talked to him a few minutes. He said, "Well, I already voted for you," because he liked my platform well enough. I talked to people who voted for Trump, and they are now voting Democratic. The abyss into which we have been flung by this greedy, treasonous monster that inhabits the White House. This is spalating the base. The anger that Ted Yoho showed to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez a week ago today was in him before he saw her. It is because she can slash the arguments he has before they even finish the argument. And they have no ground to stand on. They have tied themselves to the mast of a sinking ship,
Mr.
and they
Wells.
realize that now. The candidates here have not yet realized that, but we will make them well aware of it before November comes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Christensen. Mr. Christensen.
I think this one is going to be a fun one. Like I said, I grew up in a Republican Christian household in the middle of Indiana. I can tell you right now for a fact that going moderate, and I've been advised this, they said the only way you could possibly win is if you go moderate. You become as moderate as possible. And I said, you've never talked to a Republican, have you? As soon as you go moderate, you lose your ideals, they don't respect you. At least the people who actually stand up for what they believe, they will respect. They may not agree, but they will respect. So the question is not whether or not you change, you water down your policy. The question is, are you able to talk to people in a language that they understand? Because this is where the Republican Party has done very well for a lot of years. They are able to make an emotional appeal that actually hits people and makes them, whether or not the policy is good, want to believe in it. The question is, are you able to show people, number one, that you care about them, but you also care about whether or not they live or die? And on top of that, especially if you are talking to a Republican and they try to say that they're pro-life, Well, the greatest radical that I ever knew and I was taught about, he didn't spend his time with the political establishment. He didn't spend his time with the religious leaders of the day. In fact, he called them hypocrites to their face. He spent his time hanging around with the poor, the needy, the hungry, the sick, the downtrodden, those who were cast out of society, those who were considered not to be good enough to be in society, and those who nobody would give the time of day to. And that is who he spent time with. So you don't get to be pro-life but be okay with kids being in cages. You don't get to be pro-life but think that, you know, some kid at school gets to go hungry. You don't get to be pro-life and then ignore the fact that Jesus was a refugee for the beginning of his life. So right there, you need to, number one, you need to stick up for what you actually believe in, which is that every single person here, Republican, Independent, Democrat, as long as you are working, if you are working, you should be able to afford the basics, and that's it. That's where you start. That's the basics. And so right now we have to stop with this mellowing down our policies or only going so far, because the Republicans never do that. The reason we don't have Medicare for all is because we have not backed something further. Because when you go into a negotiation, you should come in with your strongest possible footing. And then you have things you're willing to give up. If you come in farther than Medicare for all and you have things you're willing to get up, you will end up with Medicare for all. And at worst, a public option. If you come in with a public option to start, you will end up with nothing.
30 seconds.
So right there, you have to not only have the things that will affect people's lives, you need to be able to communicate with them and approach them emotionally and connect with them emotionally and show that, number one, you are a person. Number two, you are concerned about the problems in their life. And number three, you actually know what they're going through and you're willing to fix it. And so that is how you deal with that kind of question. And that's how I've had to deal with my entire life, and including the last time I was on the phone with my mother.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. We're going to kind of wrap it up here. I'm
James,
sorry.
I'd like to go, please.
Mr. Dodds, I'm so sorry. Yes, by all means.
It's important we move it along, but I think this is an important question as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we know from our Republican family members and our Republican coworkers and our Republican neighbors that you don't really win an argument with them. You're not going to convince somebody by lecturing to them. It just doesn't work. It's just not how human nature and human psychology work. If it did, social media would be full of problem solvers and people, you know, working together to collaborate and come to a common understanding of things. But that's just not how the world is. We don't have to worry about what Republicans are going to say about us and the name calling and the accusations. We just have to be ourselves. We need to be authentic. We need to hold to what we know is going to help. Even if they don't agree, we're going to help them, right? We need to, we're not going to control them, and we're not going to argue our way out of them. So hold to our values. And so for me, that means making sure we have an uncorrupt government, a government that represents everyone, that we improve healthcare, we protect our environment. And if we keep sticking to that message, right, and we just be our true selves, then when voters look and when voters move to walk away from Trump, because there will be some, right? We don't have to convince everyone, but there are some who are ready to move away from Trump. If they look at us and say, well, I can trust that guy, I can relate to that guy, and he listens to me, we have a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, and my apologies again. I think that wraps it up here, and we will now take your summary statements. You have 2 minutes to make a summary statement. And let's begin with Mr. Dodds.
Hey, so thank you, everybody. You know, this is how democracy works. Everyone who's watching on the internet, watching the YouTube video, you know, those were important public service announcements you got in the middle there. It's important to learn your candidates. You know, you're a small subset of the overall electorate. And so I applaud you for, you know, spending the time. If you made it to the end here, you're a hero. I think you'll see that the Democratic Party has a huge opportunity here in this traditionally red district. We have the right ideas. We have the right commitment. All three of these candidates care, right? You care. These organizations that are bringing us together care. And that's really at the heart of what's going to make a difference, right? There are people who are looking at us and looking for an answer and looking for someone who can trust. And I think enough of them will turn away from Trump and see that we have an opportunity. So I'm Phil Dodds. I've been in Alachua County a long time. I've been working with doctors, building complicated software, trying to figure out, how to solve problems, how to relate to people. And I think it's so important in 2020 that we all come and show up, vote, make our voices heard, and come out with confidence. Those of you in red counties, right? Maybe you don't know so many people who believe what you believe or have your convictions, but we're out there. There are almost as many Democratic registered voters as Republican in this district. So with our enthusiasm and Trump's foibles and screw ups and lack of ethics, we have a chance. So I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you any support you might give. So thank you. I'm Phil Dodds.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Wells.
Thank you. I have 115 interns at latest count working for me. They're distributed across the country. This is true because we're running a remote campaign, which I think is morally correct thing to do as we sit here in the epicenter of the global pandemic. Why do they come to my campaign? Is it because I'm the most famous candidate here in Florida? Not by a long shot. Is it big? Certainly not in the nation. You look across, there are a lot of progressives who have tremendous followings. I believe, and they are confirming to me, that they have joined this particular campaign because it is a campaign with a strategy that, if it works at all, will work in the time frame that is demanded by our unborn children and our born children and my grandchildren and all 8 billion people on this planetary surface. We have to uncorrupt a thoroughly corrupt Congress. Right now, there are 70 members of Congress, both houses, who have been elected with small dollar donations. When we arrive in Washington, we will still, small dollar donor-supported candidates will be a minority. We have to act to separate those people from their corporate donors. We do that by doing what Kirsten Gillibrand did not quite describe. She said, nothing spoken of here in the first debate will come to pass without public funding of elections. How you pass public funding of elections is synergistically tie it to Medicare for All, which at this moment is such a clear winner for everyone, except the people who are making trillions of dollars per year off of us. When those people's voice is silenced by the public funding, and that you know that you can be reelected without having the genius of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilyana Rashida, or the beautiful, beautiful, powerful women that are in Congress now, then we will solve the problem of the climate. We will also eliminate the for-profit entities which have never existed before, like for-profit prisons, which we're exporting. We have fracking, which by this co-generated methane is the filthiest.
Thank you, Mr. Wells.
Fuel in the world.
All right, thank you. Mr. Christensen, you get the last word.
Thanks, James. I had a girl call me a few days ago. She was a former intern in Ted Yoho's office 2 years ago. And she called to tell me that, number one, what we saw on TV, that was shocking, but not unsurprising. That she knew that there was a culture that had been built and is built on Capitol Hill that predicates that kind of behavior, and at the same time ignores the people of the community. She told me about when the family separation policy went into effect, and she had grandmothers and mothers and daughters calling her, begging to know what Ted Yoho was going to do to fix it. And he never told her. So finally she walked into his office and said, what do we tell them? And he said, don't worry about it. Don't watch the TV. What you're seeing, that's not real. I mean, they're just making a lot of stuff out of this, and it's not that bad. And she came forward after Ted Yoho's behavior and basically wrote an article that said this is the culture. And she talked to me because she understood that unless we actually, number one, Ted Yoho's not running, but if you don't defeat his power structure, his donors, the people who put him in power to begin with, then you've already lost. If you don't actually fundamentally change the way that things are, or have a plan to change the way that things are, and a way to actually get elected, then you're not going to be able to do it. Our campaign is run by young people that are strong progressives that are not afraid to actually stand up and fight for the things that we believe in. We would love to have your support. We would love to not only take this and not just sit back on our haunches and hope the Republicans screw up, but actually go out and fight for our district. We have a huge surprise announcement from a former presidential candidate that we will be announcing Thursday. So if you'd like to stay tuned, that will be coming out. It's going to be exciting. It's going to throw this thing on its head, and our general election is going to be very exciting this year. So thank you. My name is Adam Christensen. Remember to vote on August 18th. Appreciate it.
And ladies and gentlemen, I think that wraps it up. Mr. Siegel, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yes, I do, James. There are a couple of things I need to say. First is thank you for being moderator. You did a nice job moving questions through. There are some people who submitted them that didn't get the chance, but we are out of time, and we do thank them for submitting them. And just a standing ovation to the three candidates. Yes. I've attended a number of these forums, and this has been probably the most serious one that I can remember, and I can see where the candidates have become more articulate over time. So this is going to be a fantastic race. Unfortunately, it makes our job harder, but only one will get elected. And I have to plead with you, please, to the audience, make sure that you do vote. You bring everybody that you know to vote, because all three of these gentlemen are worthy of the office. And we need to make sure that they can have your support to move forward. And after the election, whoever wins, come behind them and go through, because we need to take Congressional District 3 for the moral reasons and also for the political reasons. We thank you very much for attending. Our office is open Tuesday through Friday. There are offices in each of the counties. There are good candidates. Go to their website, check them out, but make sure you vote. And I wish I could say vote often, but the only way you can do that is bring friends along with you and make sure that they all vote, and let's get it done. Elect Democrats, flip Florida, and let's wake up on November 4th and celebrate and celebrate and celebrate. Thank you very much, and good night.